So we'll be starting with day 3 session. Today we have two important things to do. One is active learning. We spoke about active learning last year also when we had this session. We spoke about active learning. We'll do active learning quickly, a recap of what active learning is and what are the tools that we can use in active learning. And then we'll move on to analyzing lesson plans. Today what we're going to do is I'll give you one sample lesson plan, and based on what we learned over the past 2 days, say the competencies and the learning outcomes, you will analyze the lesson plan given to you and you will give your inputs. So that is the activity, the breakout room activity or the individual activity that we can do dependent on the number of teachers who are participants who are there in today's session. As of now, we have very limited participants. As the time goes by, if there are more participants who are joining, then we will divide it as a breakout room activity. Otherwise, we can do the analyzing of the lesson plan as an individual activity, and we can go about with today's session. So there are two main things we're going to do today. One is to understand what active learning is, and secondly, to analyze an existing lesson plan and give your opinion and feedback on how the lesson plan can be improvised, or what are the facts that are really good in the lesson plan, both the pros and cons of the lesson plan. So that's what we're going to do today. So on day 1, we looked at developing students' higher order thinking skills and opportunities in creating test items to do that practically in our classrooms. Day 2, we looked at what assessment is, the 3 major types of assessment: assessment of learning, in learning, assessment as learning, and assessment for learning. So these are the 3 types of assessments we saw, and then how to use AFL tools in our teaching learning methodologies. The 5 key strategies of AFL we saw, and there was also an after session activity assignment or where you implemented the 5 strategies for one learning outcome, and you send that document as well in the WhatsApp group. So that's what we did yesterday. And today we will be looking into active learning and analyzing lesson plan. Tomorrow we will be writing lesson plans. So day 1, day 2, day 3 is to equip you for the last day's activity, which is to write a standard lesson plan that will incorporate all the competencies, that will also ensure that the learning outcome is, the teaching learning activities ensure that the learning outcome is achieved. So we will be writing designed and well structured lesson plan tomorrow. And how to write that, because when new teachers start writing or designing such lesson plans, eventually you will go back to your school and ensure that your entire department also does this. Or maybe you can convince the heads of your school into implementing such lesson plans where competencies, where life skills are given greater importance, and your learning outcomes are also parallel to that, implementing the competencies. My only request to all the teachers who are attending these sessions, my sessions especially, because I focus more on competency. I'm a CBE trainer, CBSE approved CBE trainer. So my focus will be more on pedagogy that implements competency-based education. My request to all of you would be, kind request is, go back to your school and implement these things. Many of you are already implementing this, but it can be done on a larger scale when the heads of the schools approve it and encourage it. We alone doing it is not going to help. Just one of us or 2 of us doing it is not going to be of much use. Rather, it should be implemented as a process, and that can be done only when the heads approve. So I would recommend all of you to go back to your school, sit with the heads of your department or your school, and talk about these strategies that we have been listening to and implementing over the past 2-3 days, and talk with them and ensure that this becomes a practice. This becomes a norm in your school. Only then is it effective. Because like I told on day 1, the questions that CBSE asks, even in board examination, is all moving towards higher order thinking skills. So we need to equip our students to face such sort of question papers. And that can be done not just by one of us or 2 of us. The entire school has to move towards that change in paradigm. And that is possible only when the heads approve to it. So request you to kindly talk to the heads, convince them that this is for the benefit of the students. All right. So moving on to today's session, objectives for day 3, to understand what active learning is and the strategies that can be used to implement active learning in the classroom, to understand the key features of a good lesson plan, to understand the importance of choosing the competencies to focus on in a particular lesson, and finally to analyze a lesson plan and evaluate the important aspects. Today, what you're going to do is just analysis of lesson plan. Tomorrow, you will be writing your own lesson plan. So what is active learning? Can somebody just tell me what active learning is? Maybe you can unmute yourself. What do you think active learning is? When do you call a learning process as active learning process?
Experiential learning, ma'am.
Okay, can you please describe it? What is that? What is experiential? When you say experiential learning, what is it that you're trying to say?
That concept should relate to the real life oriented situations.
Fair enough. Okay.
Learning by doing, ma'am.
Activity-based learning, ma'am.
Well said, ma'am. Beautifully put. Experiential learning, activity-based learning, learning by doing. These are all what we call as active learning, where the child actually learns by doing. And also in the process, exactly, he becomes cognitive learner, which means his hand-eye coordination, his mental concentration is also over there. He's mentally present as well as physically present. So that is active learning, where he becomes a cognitive learner. So like you all said, the examples that you had given, all this come under active learning, where the child actually applies what he learns rather than simply learning something. One example that I would like to give to you all is write a metaphor that describes you as a teacher. I remember we did this in last year session also. I don't know how many of you attended. Valli ma'am, you might have attended it. So remember we had a discussion where I asked you to describe yourself as a teacher. It was actually a patterned activity. This time I'm going to simply ask you to unmute yourself or just put it in the chat window. If you're comfortable in unmuting yourself and answering, you can unmute, or you can simply put it in the chat window. How would you describe yourself as in a metaphor? Write a metaphor to describe yourself. For example, in any poem or lesson, when we teach them poetic devices, we tell them what metaphor is. As teachers, we explain to them what metaphor is, and we also explain to them what a simile is. Generally, children tend to get confused between a metaphor and a simile. Both are comparative poetic devices. Both are used for comparison. So where lies the difference? So when a child asks such question, either I can orally, verbally say that similes use keywords like, such as. These are certain keywords that simile uses and compares two different items. Whereas metaphor, on the other hand, is a direct comparison between two unrelated objects. Or I can give an example like this. When somebody says you're a weasel, it's a metaphor. Whereas when I say, well, I am like one, then I become a simile. So I can either put a picture like this and tell it to the students, or even much better is when I apply it and explain to them what a metaphor is. For example, when I give a metaphor to describe myself and tell them that I am this because, and then I give them reasons, then it becomes more clear to them. For example, say, let me start. This is how I describe myself. I'm a phoenix. Now I'm going to call myself a phoenix bird. This is metaphor. I'm not saying I'm like a phoenix. I'm a phoenix. And then I give a reason. I may have difficult challenges in my life that burns me down, but I gain my strength from the ashes and I rise. Rise from the challenges or the blows that life throws at me. Just like how hope rises from the ashes of shattered dream, I rise too. So I relate myself to a phoenix bird. This is a metaphor. Now when I call myself a phoenix, children will start thinking, okay, why is she calling herself a phoenix? And then they can relate, okay, phoenix birds generally burn to ashes and then they rise from the ashes. Probably that's the reason why she's calling herself a phoenix. Similarly, you can also call yourself as a particular animal or a bird or anything for that matter, any living or non-living object, I would rather prefer you relate yourself, call yourself as a bird or an animal and give an example and give reasons as to why you're calling yourself as that. This is one beautiful way of describing metaphors in the classroom. So active learning is a process that has student learning at its center. Active learning focuses on how students learn, not just on what they learn. So now the very concept of teaching a metaphor could be handled in different ways, which is what we all do. We write the word on the board and then we write the definition and we give few examples. That's one way metaphor can be described in the classroom. When children would note down the same poetic device in their readers, they will write the definition and they will underline the word that is a metaphor in the poem and then they'll move on. This is not active learning. This is a teacher-centered learning, where the teacher just says what and the students learn what. How is what is active learning. Now, when I'm involving my children in this, when you give an example like this for metaphor and ask children to, call themselves out, relate themselves to an object and explain it, children will get involved. And the introverted and the timid children, of course, you can always make them write. Children who are not comfortable speaking, I wouldn't recommend always to make them write. I would recommend you to start that way and eventually try to rope them in as well, so that even if they are wrong, they can start speaking. Once they become comfortable with the environment, even timid children will start to speak. And the job of making the classroom comfortable to all students is our job. It's our duty to ensure that the classroom feels like a safe place for every child, not just the bright students or the A+ grade students. Even the timid students, all students who score C or D should feel that the classroom is a safe haven. So that is our responsibility. Once they start feeling that way, they will eventually start coming out of their shell and start talking in the classroom. Active learning is not about a particular activity, but about getting students to think and think hard. Now, when I asked you to relate yourself to an object and give me an answer, you needed time to think, right? That's all is the purpose of active learning. When a child is able to think, we have crossed half the, our task. We have done half the task. Once the child begins to think, he becomes his own owner of learning. And that's what active learning engages children to do. So the key elements of an active learning approach are: first, skills, then language, inspiration, motivation, and support. Every child is unique in his or her own way, as we saw yesterday. So the skills are there. The language is something that the child has to develop. Skills also, the competency skills also have to be developed in the child. But how do we do it? With consistent support, consistent motivation, and setting an example. As teachers, when I give them a task to complete, I give them an example to show them this is how it needs to be done, so that they can use that as a reference to do their tasks. Just like how we did yesterday and today also. When you're analyzing a lesson plan, you will first be given the task to analyze the lesson plan, and then when we come back to our main room, I'll show you the analyzed lesson plan so that you get an idea of how to analyze a lesson plan. So in order to help you do something new, I need to give you something as a backup, a reference that you can look at and get inspiration and do. And that is exactly what we need to do in a classroom as well. We can't simply ask a child, stand up and give a 1-minute speech on a particular topic. Just a minute. We can't just ask a child to just stand up and do it. We need to encourage them, motivate them, support them, and tell them it's okay to make mistakes. Generally, children who don't speak are the children who believe that it is a huge sin to make mistake. Please make them realize that it's okay to commit mistake, but it's not okay to repeat it. When they realize that, then they will be more open and they will not feel sorry about committing mistake. They will realize that committing mistake is the way we learn. That's extremely important. What should children do? They should get into the habit of let the children ask questions. Many children have the fear of asking doubts, asking questions. What if I sound stupid? What if the teacher shouts at me? What if the teacher judges me? What if my friends and peers start laughing at me and judge me? Thus, these are certain aspects that make the child feel, make the child hesitate to ask questions. Please eliminate these sort of fears from the mind of the children. That's extremely important. As a teacher, as a facilitator, I need to ensure to make the classroom a very safe place for the students to ask questions, to not feel vulnerable, to not feel sorry about asking questions, or not to feel like a fool or a stupid person. That is extremely important. That's why yesterday I said emotional health of a child is very important, and we can't just ignore it. The emotional health and the support that we give to a child is very crucial, especially during the adolescent age of 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. That is the age when the children start growing those sense of fear and humiliation and doubt and hesitation. 6th till 7th standard, they don't care. They just go about asking questions. Even if it is extremely foolish, they don't care. It's from class 8, they start changing. Their behavior changes, their mentality changes, their outlook towards the society changes, their the way they look at us teachers changes. Everything changes. So it's extremely important to support them emotionally, support them mentally, so that when they come to the classroom, they feel safe. And when they start feeling safe, then they will easily come out of their shell and start to communicate better, ask questions, don't hesitate to communicate with their parallels as well as to the facilitator or the teacher who is currently present in the classroom. Activate these higher order thinking skill in the students. Build a rapport with the children. It's extremely crucial to build a good rapport with the children. And that is why, there are many teachers, especially seasoned teachers who have 15 years, 10 years, 15 years of experience. They generally say, I ensure that the child likes me. When the child likes the teacher, the child eventually starts liking the subject as well. I don't know how many of you might have noticed it. It's a very important thing that we all would have realized also. I have seen my own nephew who says, I'm not really interested in history, but I'll read it for my teacher. He says that to
Absolutely
me.
true, ma'am. Sorry
So
for the
true.
interruption.
No,
Absolutely
please, I
true.
want you to interrupt me. I want you to share it. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
So when a child likes the teacher, he or she will study the subject. My own nephew says that I hate history; it's boring. But you know what? I like my social science teacher, and I can't show my face to her if I score 20 out of 40 or 25 out of 40. So for her, I'll study. I can't score 25 and face my social science teacher. So for her, I'll study. That's the way my nephew looks at it. Even if it's a similarly, even language for that matter, Hindi. God, it's painful. It's extremely hard. But still, I like the teachers, so I'll read. I have teachers who say that to me. So that is what we need to develop, a rapport. We need to build a rapport with the children so that all those doubts and questions, children, even if they feel that this activity doesn't make sense, they will do it for your sake. And then eventually you can explain to them why that activity is important or why that thing. For example, writing skill, formal letters. I have children who come and tell me, ma'am, who writes letters like this? What is the purpose of this formal letter? What from address, date in full, to address, subject? Who writes letters like this nowadays, ma'am? They ask me. But then they do it for my sake. I'll tell them, please, can you just listen to me, follow the format that CBSE has given, score marks, or, get into it. See, more than format, that's why, CBSE gives more importance to creativity than format, especially in literature. Even in writing skill, CBSE doesn't give too much of importance to format. It gives greater importance to the content in it. But then we inculcate that habit of following the format in our students just to be on the safer side. But then children do it. And then finally, I tell them the reason why we do it, why there should always be a clear, structured pattern for everything. Life should also be structured. When you don't have structure or a pattern in a letter that you write, how are you going to have a structured daily life in your life when you go outside the school? Everything matters. Maintaining structure is extremely important. That will help you in sequencing your ideas. When you have a first para, introductory para, main content para, conclusion para, that will give you a structure. That will help you in sequencing your letter. I then explain to them why, and then they understand. That's why yesterday I said, why is the most important question to be answered, and why is answered, the what and the how will automatically follow. That's why yesterday also when Alpha sir was asking me, why do we do this? Or do you think the parents would agree to it? Or do you think the society will agree to it? Why answering that question, why, and believing in it as teachers is extremely crucial to, cascade it down to our students and the other stakeholders in the school. We can cascade it to other teachers and other students and other stakeholders only when we believe in the purpose. Otherwise, we can't do it. So understanding the why is very important. Building that rapport with the children, making them like you is very important. It's not easy, I agree, but it is important and eventually beneficial for the students as well. Not only to score marks or study your subject well, but also to, when you have a good rapport with the children, they will come to you with all sorts of problems within the school as well as outside school. And that is very important in the age group of 11 to or 12 to 16 that we are handling. That's the age group that we are handling. And it's very important that children come to us with their problem rather than taking it in their own hands and getting into some sort of trouble. It's always important for kids to come to us and approach us. And for that, they need to trust us. And that trust is extremely important. We need to build that trust beyond the teaching that we do, the academic teaching that we do. Consolidate the ideas, give them challenges that make them think, and help them construct their own answers. These are the 6 major important things that we do in an active learning classroom. A classroom is an active learning classroom only when these 6 aspects happen in the classroom on a regular basis throughout the year. Give the pupils something to do, like you rightly said, learning by doing, not something to learn or rote learn. And if the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking, learning naturally happens. John Dewey says this. We all know who Dewey is. So he says that when the doing demands thinking, when the child has to apply, the child has to analyze and evaluate, learning naturally happens as a byproduct. You don't have to spend too much time on learning. And that's the beauty of learning by doing. Active learning, that's the beauty of active learning. Let's move on to designing and first of all analyzing. After that only is designing. Let's move on to lesson plans. So before we move on to analyzing a lesson plan, which is what we're going to do today, let us look at what makes a good lesson plan. How do I identify a good lesson plan? Now, I'm not going to talk about the format because different schools have different formats. Different teachers may have different ways of planning their lessons. Some of you may start from say literature, some of you may start from supplementary, some of you may think, let us do writing skill, let us start with grammar. So you may all have different ways of planning your lessons. And the format of writing the lesson plan would change or differ based on the school you're working in. That is exactly not what I'm talking about. Format could be anything. The content is what is more important. However, what are the key features you would expect to see in a good lesson plan, regardless of the format or template that is used? That's exactly what we'll be seeing today. We should definitely involve competencies in our lesson plan. A lesson plan without competencies is meaningless. At the end of every lesson, there is an LO, learning outcome, that we all have, which I'm sure you all will be implementing. But eventually, there are also certain skills that the child should learn after a period of, say, a week or 10 days or 20 days or a month or quarter of the year. There are certain competencies or life skills that the child should learn. And these are the 6 major life skills or competencies, and your lesson plan should include these competencies. Critical thinking, higher order thinking, learning how to learn, to be the owner of their own learning, how to be a self-learner, solving problems, coming up with solutions to any issues, communicating ideas, how to be not just a self-learner, but also to guide their peers or their panels, the other students in learning by communicating and collaborating. The final one is teamwork, collaborating in pairs, groups, and teams. These are the various competencies that should be, your lesson plan can either have 1 or 2 or more of lesson plans in your, of competencies in your lesson plan. Traditionally, teachers have focused on the subject content of the lesson, and the lesson planning has reflected this. Week 1, finish this. Week 2, finish this. Week 3, finish this. This is how we go. We shall be looking at how we can adapt these content-focused plans to integrate the development of student competencies into our teaching. As an example, we shall look at the outline plan for a grade 9 English lesson on the next few slides. Read it, then suggest any comments you may have. So this is the improvised lesson plan after addition of few aspects. Now, the previous lesson plan that you have, the one that requires improvement, is with you all. And you see that there are only two very simple learning outcomes in that lesson plan that was given to you earlier, which is just to read the poem and interpret the theme, identify and appreciate the metaphors. That is not the intention of a poem. So over here, I have a lesson plan which has a lot of learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are extremely important. As I told you, learning outcomes are measurable or tangible aspects that we can assess within our students, among our students. Something that they have learned at the end of a poem or a chapter. That's called learning outcome. Is the child able to read the literary text just for pleasure? Is the child able to compare and contrast? Interpret the meaning of what the poet is trying to say, and like Sukanya ma'am rightly said, relate it to what he or she is going through. The child able to appreciate the character, the dilemma the character had while making a choice. Is the child able to appreciate the character? Is the child able to appreciate the theme and the plot and the incidents given? The way the poet says, I first looked at the first, the road, which was quite used by many people. I saw to it until the end, the bend of the road. But then beyond that, it wasn't visible. And then I took a look at the second road, and the second path seemed to be something that wasn't used by many people. It wanted wear and tear. So I chose the second path. Is the child able to appreciate the intention of the poet to choose a less traveled path? Why is the poet trying to do it? So the poet is focused more on his passion. The poet is driven by his passion than the mundane decisions that people take based on many other reasons. The poet over here is driven by his passion, and writing poem, being a poet, is not a career that many people choose, and he chooses that less traveled road, and that is the intention. The poet writes this poem only based on the choice that he had taken, the decision that he had taken. We all know about the background of Robert Frost. That's another thing that we have to tell the children. We need to tell the children the story of Robert Frost, how he was born in UK, how he was a struggling poet when he was in UK, how he moved to US, and in view of expanding himself, his ideas, and writing poems, and in view of recognition, in order to get some good recognition as a poet, he moves to US. How he is recognized as a successful writer and a poet, and how he returns back to UK with that success under his belt. So we need to give a little quick background about the poet so that the children can relate to the intention of the poet, can appreciate the emotion of the poet when he is writing this poem. The children don't know the background of the poet, his life history, at least a little bit, then they won't be able to appreciate this. So that is a learning outcome, to appreciate the intentions and the ideas, and to identify and appreciate the various literary elements that are present over here. Metaphor, not only for the sake of metaphor, but how he beautifully compares the choices to the road taken. And how he says that one way leads to another. And I don't know whether I'll come back to the previous road. Just like how our one choice desires the next decision, which in turn desires the next decision. One way leads to another. The way he connects the choices in life to the journey in the forest. This is very important. Also, the reason why he took the autumn season, why the forest was it was autumn season, and it was fall. Why does the poet use the season fall? Why couldn't he use the season spring or summer or winter? Why fall? So this relation this appreciation of the poem and the sentences that the poet has used, the words or the phrases the poet has used, is extremely crucial for children to appreciate the poem on a whole. And also to identify and appreciate significant literary devices, the poetic devices like metaphor, imagery, personification, onomatopoeia, viewpoint of the poem, rhyme scheme, the road not taken, the very title. What does the title imply? So these are the various things that the child has to learn at the by the time he finishes reading the poem. So these are my learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are always tangible, measurable aspects. My lesson duration is 40 minutes, or if I take 2 days to complete this poem, I'll keep it as 1 hour and 20 minutes. Depends upon my the time that has been allotted by each school. Resource needed, of course, the textbook. If we are if during the pandemic time when the same session was taken by me previous year, I had also included few videos, YouTube videos that I can show about Robert Frost or about someone else who is finding it hard to make choices. So I also had that as my resources during pandemic time. Now that everything has become offline, that's not required. Now coming to introductory activity, these are some introductory activities that are child-centric. Instead of the introductory activity that you had, where the teacher explains what metaphor is, and then the teacher asks learners to write 3 metaphors. Instead of that, I've changed the introductory activity this way. This way, it's more child-centric. Of course, I am beginning it. As a teacher, I have to initiate the conversation. But then I leave the floor to the children to continue the conversation and take reign of the conversation. I describe myself as a teacher to the class using a metaphor. This is the exact activity we did in the beginning of this session. And then I explain to the class why the metaphor is meaningful to me. For example, an example is given over here. I'm a gardener. Why am I a gardener? Because I plant seeds, water them, weed my garden, and later in the year it blooms into an array of beautiful flowers. That's what we do as teachers, right? We put in so much of effort. We plant the seeds of ideas in our children's minds. We water them, we encourage them, we push them forward. We use all techniques to push them. We sometimes convince them, we cajole them, we threaten them, we punish them, we request them, we do everything. We appreciate them, we pat their back and applaud them, and we choose different ways of encouraging them and helping them move forward. That is similar to watering them and weeding off my garden, removing unnecessary things from their minds, fear, humiliation, anxiety, emotional trauma, whatever it is. As teachers, we help weed those thoughts away from the children's mind. So later on, these children bloom into beautiful flowers. So I can relate, as a teacher, I can relate myself to a gardener. So when I explain this to my students, they'll feel attracted to this very concept of metaphor, and then they can start imagining themselves to be different items, and they can explain it in the class. And then put the students in pairs, ask them to think of a metaphor to describe them as a student and share it. Stress that they must explain why they have chosen that metaphor. You could model this example to get them going. I am a tortoise. It takes me a while to get going in class. I don't always grasp things straight away, but I'm a steady learner. It's okay if I'm slow. The slow and steady wins the race. So I have no shame in calling myself a tortoise. And I'm determined. So I always get there in the end. That's all is important. That's all matters. As long as I have my determination, even if I'm slow, it's okay. I know that I'll reach my destination. So I'm a tortoise. You can give such examples to children to kindle their interest and passion in coming up with metaphors to describe themselves. This is a beautiful introductory activity for this poem. This way I don't have to explain to them in words. They have themselves learn it by doing it. This is what is learning by doing, or active learning, is all about. Ask the students about what the learning intentions of the lesson may be. Ask them to give an idea. What do you think? Road not taken. What does that mean? What do you think the poet is trying to say? Don't even read the poem. Just give me your ideas. You will be surprised with the kind of amazing answers children will come up with. They would have figured out the entire poem just by reading the title, right? So write on the whiteboard how to write meaningful metaphors and explain to them. This is my introductory activity. And as I told you, the time allotted is equally important. I should not take the entire day, the hour. 40 minutes or 1 hour, whatever time is allotted to us, I should not take it for my introductory activity. It's okay if all 40 students don't participate. Even if 4 or 5 participate, that's enough to encourage the others to participate in the next activity. So look at the assessment that I do. I'm doing assessment as I'm learning, assessment for learning. I represent myself as a model and I show learners how to respond successfully, how to give a proper response. And then I elicit the evidence of learning. I understand if they give correct answers, I have understood that they have learned the meaning of metaphor. So this is an assessment for learning. As I'm learning, I'm assessing the children. And then I'm also sharing the intention of my activity. Why am I doing this ice-breaking activity? I share my intention to my children. Then the main activity, read the poem to the class, ask learners to identify any words they don't understand, any complicated words, and put them on the whiteboard or on the blackboard through questioning. See if they can work on the meaning from the context. It's always encourage children to, one, try to figure out the meaning of the word through the context in which it's used, or two, try to look up a dictionary on their own rather than always relying on the teacher to give the meaning of a word. Let them try to figure out the meaning based on the context, or let them look up the dictionary on their own. It's extremely important, then they become self-learners. Through this discussion, ensure that the word diverged is explained as it is a keyword in the poem. When two roads diverge, what does the word diverge mean? Why is the poet using that word diverge? Let the children think on that, ponder on that. Put the learners into pairs and ask them to discuss these questions about each stanza. This is collaborative learning. Stanza 1, what decision is the speaker trying to make? Stanza 2, how does the speaker feel about each of the two roads? Stanza 3, does the speaker think he will ever be able to travel down both the roads? Why or why not? Which road does the speaker desire to travel down and why? Put these questions. Every time you read a stanza, put these questions. This is assessment for learning and assessment as learning. You will be assessing the children and learning simultaneously. Then let them compare and each other's answers and come up with better answers. Then you also have group discussions that you can do. And then all this go on for say around 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And finally, you also have a plenary activity at the end of the lesson. I'm just quickly glancing through this. I will share this document with you so that you can take a look at it. Kindly mute yourself. Request you to kindly mute yourself. Raj sir, please mute yourself. Okay. So, and finally, we have the plenary or assessment that we do, or an activity that we do after the end of the session. Ask the learners to think of examples of big choices which represent a fork in the road. Choices that lead us in a direction that is likely to have a significant impact, especially classes 9 and 10 can relate to it because they need to choose the group after 10th standard. So they can relate to it. Ask for their contributions and encourage them to write it on the board or maybe read it out loud. So what are the key competencies? Are they able to critically think? Are they able to communicate? If it is a teamwork, are they able to collaborate with each other? And emotional development. Are they able to emotionally relate to the poet? Once the child begins to relate to the poet, he is developing emotionally as well. So these are the competencies that the children will learn at the end of this activity, this lesson or this poem. And I'm sorry, we have assessment for every activity. Collaboration, providing feedback, discussions to elicit evidence of learning. So my assessment is done for all the activities. This is how an ideal lesson plan should be. So what I'm going to do is today, after the session ends, I will share this ideal lesson plan with all of you. So that tomorrow when you write your own lesson plan for a topic that I will give to you tomorrow, you can use this as a template to create your own lesson plan. This is something that you should do in your classroom as well, where you give a template to children when they are doing something new, when they're doing something challenging, give them a template to back on, to rely on. Just like how I'm going to give you this lesson plan as a template when you're going to write your lesson plans tomorrow. So this is something that I wanted to do today. The main thing is analyzing the lesson plan. Now, you need to also think on how the teacher's role has changed from that of a teacher to that of a facilitator. What has changed for the learners? What key competencies are addressed and what makes it a more effective lesson? So these are the aspects that you need to think on while writing a very good and a standard lesson plan.